Listen, I didn't want to believe it when I heard it, but I couldn't deny that once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. So I'm spoiling up into Crescent City, House of Flame and Shadow. If you have not read every single one of these books, or if you're one of those crazy people who don't mind spoilers, it's time to go. I'm going to begin with, honestly, the one that's been keeping me up at night, and that is Bryce Quinlan instigates the main conflict of ACOTAR 5. If you guys remember, in House of Flame and Shadow, we find out that the Asteri have been putting a parasite in the water so that Bryce Quinlan and all the people who live in Crescent City will have their magic blocked. What I want you to remember is that Bryce Quinlan, when she goes into like the ACOTAR world and they're in the caves, her, Azriel, and Nesta, she is intentionally, in order to attract the Midgard worm, she is putting her cut open hand that is bleeding in the water so that her blood can run through the stream and attract the Midgard worm. But at the time, they did not know about the parasite in the blood system, meaning that the anti-magic blood-blocking parasite that was in Bryce Quinlan's blood is now in the water in ACOTAR. So I think one of two things. Either one, this is the absolute biggest plot hole that Sarah J. Maas needs to fix and explain as soon as possible. Or two, that is going to be the main conflict of ACOTAR 5. People are going to start losing their magic. The next two are all timeline related. It's one or the other. These are just the two theories as they currently stand, and that is regarding the timeline of the Maasverse. The first one, and I think the one that everyone really is hoping for, is that all of three of these worlds exist at the same exact time. I do think there's a high likelihood of this because we had Aelin pop into ACOTAR when she's falling in between the worlds in Kingdom of Ash, and Rhysand kind of shoots magic at her to like slow her down as she's falling through the worlds. So those happen, and then on top of that, we see Bryce Quinlan go to ACOTAR. So naturally, you can assume that all three of these are happening at the same time, but who's to say that the worlds don't operate on different timelines? She might not have just been falling through worlds, she could have been falling through time. So although I think this is good evidence for the fact that all three of these coexist at the same time, I do also think it doesn't necessarily disprove theory number two, which is Throne of Glass happened first and then Crescent City and ACOTAR follow afterwards. This is mostly because there are so many characters in both of these series that really do closely correlate with Throne of Glass characters, and a lot of people are assuming that they're either descendants of them, or maybe the characters from the different series have descendants from even another world that we just don't know about. Some of these correlations include, but are not excluded to, Tamlin being a descendant of Aelin and Lysandra. Tamlin is known for really strong shapeshifting abilities, and then obviously what other shapeshifter do we know? Lysandra. Some people like to complain that this can't possibly be a thing because Lysandra and Tamlin look nothing alike. I will remind you that in Queen of Shadows, we learned that Lysandra changed her appearance before the King of Aderlin put up an anti-magic triangle and kept her from shifting anymore. Lysandra says herself that she doesn't really remember what she looked like as a child, so technically she could have been born looking very similar to Tamlin. Next is Danica from Crescent City being Danica Fendir. If you ask me, that sounds a lot like Fenris, and they both can shapeshift into wolves. And I know some people are like, oh, well, Danica's a werewolf and Fenris was just a fae that could shift into wolves. But in Crescent City 3, we do learn that every single creature in Crescent City actually is just a watered down version of fae. So it's still a possibility. Next, and this one's more of like a headcanon of sorts, but a lot of people like to say that Kaltain is the Suriel. I honestly 110% absolutely love this theory. And there's two main reasons why I really think that Kaltain could be the Suriel and why it would absolutely scratch an itch in my brain that I cannot reach. One, the Suriel is emotionally connected to their cloak, and I think that's probably closely correlated to Kaltain being so thankful to Aelin for giving her her cloak in the dungeons. And we know right before Kaltain sacrifices herself so that Elide and all the other witches can get away, that the piece of Aelin's cloak meant like the world to her and was a big contributor to how she did not fully give in to the Valg influence. One of my personal favorites of the descendants theory is that Azriel is a descendant descendant of Dorian and Manon. Azriel's powers are exactly the same as Dorian's, and then on top of that, he does have a lot of the brutality of Manon. Then this next one, which is going to come with a little asterisk, I say Rhysand and Rundanon, and yes, I do believe that they are extremely related, whether they are twins or they are cousins or they're related in some sort of way. I'm not really sure, but Rune and Rhysand have to be related in some way. It's to the point where when Bryce landed in the ACOTAR universe and she saw Rhysand, for a hot second, she thought it was Rune. That is how similar their appearances are. And I will remind you that Rundanon is her half-brother. So, like, she knows what he looks like, okay? If I were to confuse a stranger that I met on the street with one of my sisters, that would be wild. Like, that is the equivalent to that. That is not a normal occurrence. So they have to be related in some way. But I think they're both directly related to Queen Maeve from Throne of Glass. And I'm actually going to explain that a little more thoroughly in a different theory, so I'm just going to move on for now. Now, my personal favorite in the Descendants theory, and the one that took it from being like a theory to me to practically being proven in Crescent City 3, was that Lydia is a descendant of Aelin and Rowan. Not only is she in possession of one of their wedding rings, but she also named one of her sons Bran after one of her ancestors, Brannon of the Wildfire. And then on top of that, they have a special like ancestral ritual that they do that involves fire and a stag. Like, I feel like if you are in denial that Lydia is a descendant or directly correlated with Aelin, you are denying facts at this point. And here's another reason why I love this. In Crescent City 3, we get a lot more of Lydia and Rundanon's romance, and I think it would be absolutely wild because they would be the ultimate Romeo and Juliet retelling. You mean that, like, Queen Maeve has a descendant and it fell in love with Aelin's descendant? Mortal enemies? That would be absolutely insane. And for those of you who are like, no, that would be really gross because Maeve was her aunt, I will remind you that Maeve used her Daemati powers to manipulate everyone's brain into thinking that she was Aelin's aunt, but they are not actually blood related in any single way. Next is Asteri and Valg are the same. And I would even go a step further and say Daglin are the same as well, but we do not know enough about the Daglin for me to confidently say this theory. So we're just going to stick to the Asteri and the Valg princes for now. Both are described as being from other worlds, and those other worlds are not exactly defined. They have been world hoppers for a long time. And speaking of a long time, they're very, very, very old, and they've been doing this for a very, very long time. Then both Valg and Asteri feed off of magic, and both of them have the end goal in life to conquer the world. And then their appearances can be manipulated. And then something that I think whenever Sarah J. Maas reuses the same word over and over and over again, we need to pay attention to it because I've yet to see a situation where she's done that not on purpose. But every single time she describes the eyes of a Valg prince or of an Asteri, she uses the word glowing a lot, and she loves to talk about how captivating their eyes are. Now, this next one, I might make a couple diehard Crescent City fans mad with this one, but since Hunt is made to be her Karanom, I don't think that someone who has been made can be a mate, like not truly in the way that mate should be. So part of me wonders if that when Hunt Athalar was made and he kind of had a sort of mating bond, I think Bryce Quinlan already had a real mate that was natural and was not made, and I think that is Azriel. I think this for a couple of reasons. When she jumped through the world, she ended up landing directly in front of Azriel. I do not think that was an accident. On top of that, her sword and his daggers not only are a set and they're like fated to be together, but they like speak to each other. I don't think them both being in possession of those blades was also an accident. And maybe this is just my opinion, but I feel like in ACOTAR, we don't get enough of Azriel being like vulnerable, like he's there, but we don't actually like get to see Azriel. But for some reason, when he is going through the caves with Bryce, I feel like we get way more from Azriel as a person in this book than we did in this entire series yet. And then I think the most obvious one is that their magic directly correlates with each other. He masters shadows and she masters light. And now, the scariest theory. I hate to break it to you, but once you hear the evidence for why Rhysand is evil, you will not be able to read the books the same again. Rhysand is extremely powerful. He's actually the most powerful of all of the High Lords. For some reason, we're not questioning that. You know who is also the most significantly powerful beings in their universe? The Asteri. Significantly more powerful than even the angels. And the archangels, they could literally demolish entire cities just by landing too hard on the ground. Archangels are extremely, extremely powerful. So why are they so afraid of the Asteri? The Asteri are significantly more powerful. Then we also have the Valg. Despite the fact that there are so many powerful people in Throne of Glass, for example, like Aelin, there was still that fear for what the Valg King was capable of. It is because Valg are extremely, extremely powerful. Then, of course, there are the direct correlations to Maeve. Not only do they have the same exact appearance, but they're both Daemati. He can read your mind, break into your mind, and even control your mind. Now, this is the part that a lot of people really, really won't like, and I personally hate this theory, but I cannot deny that it just does not sit well with me. Every single one of these Sarah J. Maas books are third person. You are getting multiple POVs from multiple different characters. Now tell me why the first 3 books of ACOTAR are all Farah's POV. At first I thought this was a stylistic choice by Sarah J. Maas, but then notice when we went to Flame and Shadow into Nesta's story, she jumps back into the third person. Then also tell me why Rhysand literally tells Farah in the first 2 books when he's explaining Daemati powers to her that he could literally be controlling her mind and she would never even know. I hate the excuse of unreliable narrator, because in my opinion, it's usually lazy writing. If Sarah J. Maas pulls an unreliable narrator on us after making us fall in love with Rhysand in the first 3 books, that would be psychotic behavior, and she has completely set herself up to do so. Also keep in mind that when Tamlin put a glamour over Farah's entire family, Nesta was unaffected. So tell me why everyone loves Rhysand except for Nesta. Tell me why when Amren and Nesta became friends, Amren prioritized teaching her how to close off her mind. All interesting things worth considering? Potentially. Like I said, I would really, really hate if this was true. I do not want Rhysand to be evil, but just wait, it gets worse, because those are all situational coincidences, right? Now, let's get into things that are a little harder to ignore. Nesta and Cassian learn about the Wild Hunt, so they come and they ask Rhysand about it, and he nonchalantly and casually is like, oh, it's a myth, but when they press him for more questions, he happens to know the entire myth in a lot of detail. He tells us about a people called the Daglin that existed long ago. Remember that? Long ago. And these Daglin had beasts that they used to hunt down humans and fae, aka the Wild Hunt. And when Rhysand goes to change the topic, Nesta says that Lanthis gave her a vision and showed her exactly what these beasts looked like. And she, coincidentally, notices that they look exactly like the beasts carved into the pillars and the columns in the Court of Nightmares. And then on top of that, in ACOWAR, when Rhysand is fighting in battle, he changes into his beast form. And tell me why it is described to look exactly like the beasts that were carved into the pillars and columns of the Court of Nightmares. Like, are you seeing it now? Are you seeing the correlation there? And then don't even get me started on the fact that Rhysand knows the ancient languages that we thought only Amren knew. And that makes sense, because Amren's like, what, 15,000 years old? Like, Amren, we don't know nearly as much as we should about Amren. Amren is a whole nother thing entirely. Tell me, why does he know the ancient Fae language? And then when asked about it, he just says, oh, my education was quite thorough. That is not That is not an explanation. Then the one that you've probably seen all over TikTok, because it did go kind of viral, I would say about like 2 weeks ago is when I started seeing it all over my For You page. Rhysand is largely correlated to the theme of choice. People jokingly have even called him the Lord of Choice. His whole thing is that he wants to give Farrah a choice. He wants to give everyone a choice. Everyone has a choice. Do you know what choice is in Norwegian? Valg. Valg is Norwegian for choice. Choice in Norwegian is Valg. I do not think that was an accident in the slightest. I think everything that Sarah J. Maas does has a lot of intentions to it, and I think we have uncovered quite literally one of the most insane plot twists of any Sarah J. Maas book ever, if Rhysand is truly evil. Well, that is all I had for today. I am definitely interested in doing a part 2 of Maasverse theories if you guys are interested. If you know any other Maasverse theories and you want to share them in the comments, I would absolutely love to hear them. In the meantime, why don't you check out my Maasverse playlist, as well as subscribe to get notified whenever I post another bookish video. I'll see you next week.